I'm going to start with Pete Hegseth. And some of this stuff is very difficult to talk about. Pete Hegseth, as you know, has been chosen by Donald Trump to be his Secretary of Defense. I told you about the adultery. I told you about the way he's treated women his whole life. I discussed that on this show right out of the gate. This stuff is very difficult to talk about. But I received details of what is in that police report where a woman in California claims that Pete Hegseth, in a police report, physically blocked her from leaving a hotel room, took her phone, and then sexted her, even though she remembered saying no a lot. And this police report was obtained by CNN. It's a 22-page report. It includes conflicting accounts of how intoxicated Hegseth and the woman were, and descriptions of video surveillance showing some of their movements that night. Now, the women who accused Hegseth of assault broke into tears when asked about the matter by CNN reporters last week. Now, unless she's some sort of phenomenal actress, which I do not believe she is, I believe something really terrible happened in that room that night. What does she say happened? Well, she told police that her memory after the argument, they had some sort of big verbal argument in that hotel room. She told officers that Hegseth took her phone from her hands. Then she said she tried to leave the room and he held her against her will, blocking the door with his body. She said she remembered saying no quite often. Next, she said she remembered Hegseth over her on a bed or couch, lying on top of her with his dog tags hovering over her face. She later went to the hospital and told the nurse that she could not remember whether or not a penetration occurred, but believed that she was sexually assaulted at that time. She told police that she remembered Hegseth, for lack of a better term, I'm trying not to be too graphic, finishing onto her stomach before throwing a towel at her and asking if she was okay. She told police she didn't even remember how she got back to her hotel room, but remembered walking into her room, getting into bed, and the alleged victim's husband said to police that he was worried when she didn't get back to the hotel room earlier that night and that she didn't return until about 4 o'clock in the morning. Pete Hegseth was asked about this earlier today in the House chambers after having a meeting with the incoming Vice President J.D. Vance, and here's what he had to say.
Did you assault women in Monterey, California?
I have, as far as the media is concerned, I'll keep this very simple. The matter was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared, and that's where I'm going to leave it. Thank you very much.
So the audio, not easy to hear. He said, I was fully investigated and I was cleared. Yeah, from a criminal standpoint, he is correct. But I'm going to ask all of you this question and think for a moment, and I want you to forget if you're a Republican or a Democrat, if that's possible. I know for some people that's very difficult these days, but I want you to forget your biases. Forget the fact that you might be a Trump supporter or you're not a Trump supporter. Please put that aside for a moment, and I want to ask all of you a very serious question. Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, you're a prominent member of the media or you have a prominent job as the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, whatever the case may be, you might have a very public job. And let's just hypothetically say a woman is claiming that you said and or her. Let's just say for a moment it's not true. And let me be very clear. I think this alleged victim is telling the truth. But for hypothetical purposes, let's just say a woman's trying to ruin your life. She's trying to put your name out there, lying about you, saying that you perhaps assaulted her. There's a police report and all that. I would imagine your first reaction would be would be a lot of anger, right? Would your next reaction be to pay her off? Just think about that for a second. I can only speak for myself, and I'd say if someone made up a story like that about me, by the way, I don't think this story's made up, But hypothetically speaking, if somebody made up a story like that about me, I would immediately hire an attorney and I would immediately sue that person for defamation, because I think one of the worst things you can do besides is lying about it. But that's not what Pete Hegseth did. See, this happened years ago. There was no defamation lawsuit. There was no civil action against this woman. What did Pete Hegseth do? Well, according to Hegseth's own attorney, who acknowledged it, he paid her off. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. He paid her off. Says he's completely innocent. He didn't do anything wrong. But he paid her an undisclosed amount of money. And I would imagine that was probably a large sum of money, since he makes a lot of money. Is that the actions and the behavior of someone that is completely innocent? The police report is out there. For whatever reason, the police decided not to file charges. I'm going to tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. When they try to tell you who they are, believe them. A man who cheated on his first wife with a coworker. A man, and I use that term loosely, and right now I don't care about whether he served this country or not, because we are talking about infidelity and we are talking about sexual assault. So the amount of time that somebody served this country has no bearing on this story. He cheated on his first wife with somebody he worked with. He cheated on his second wife with a Fox News executive and had a baby with her while still married to another woman. That ex-wife, eventually the ex-wife, filed a lawsuit against him. This is a really bad guy. Pete Hegseth is a bad guy. And I don't care whether he served this country or not in this conversation. I always respect anybody who serves, but what does it matter at this point when you have the history that this man has, the way he's treated women his entire life, and still saying that he doesn't think that women should serve on the battlefield? Let me tell you something. I believe this victim. I believe her. Is she just a phenomenal actress that'll just cry on command? Well, when the CNN reporters caught up with her a week ago and asked her, she's not allowed to talk about it. She signed a non-disclosure. She started crying. I'll tell you what I think happened. Everything that this woman said. Because I believe her. I believe this woman. I believe that Pete Hegseth held this woman in that hotel room against her will. I believe what she said. I believe there was a assault that took place. And I believe the reason why he paid her off was not because, well, I'm in fear that she's going to ruin my reputation, because an assault happened in that room and you didn't want it to go public. You didn't want her to go public. So you paid her off. The same reason why Donald Trump paid off his ex-wife who claimed that he raped her. The same reason why Donald Trump paid off all those discrimination lawsuits. They pay people off. They use their money and their power to pay people off so stories can go away. We could be talking about Harvey Weinstein, for example. We could be talking about Bill Cosby. Why is it? We could be talking about Matt Gaetz. Why is it that all these men in powerful positions just pay women so the story can kind of go away? Stormy Daniels being another perfect example of what I'm talking about, even though that wasn't it was just having unprotected sex with a star 2 weeks after Barron was born. But for all you right-wing evangelical Christians out there, this is what you got. You obviously don't care. This is who Pete Hegseth is. You want him to be the Secretary of Defense? Are you effing kidding me? This guy's despicable, and he's a disgrace. So speaking of dangerous, I don't pay much attention to Don Jr., and quite frankly, I don't think his father does either. Biff is not the brightest bulb in the world. I think he's a complete imbecile and a trust fund baby. Nepotism at its finest. And like I said, I don't normally pay attention to anything that Don Jr. says, but I'm paying attention to this. So Don Jr. did a interview. It was a podcast with a right-wing podcaster. And he was talking about a recent conversation he had with Mr. Cheeto Jesus, also known as Donald Trump Jr., Donald Trump, his father, and Don Jr. They're having this discussion, and they're talking about the media. Now, if you recall when Donald Trump was in the White House, he attacked members of the media every single day, whether it be a Jim Acosta or a black journalist who he seemed to have a habit of attacking black female journalists. Anybody basically that challenged Donald Trump, either then or now, he attacks, right? So this is Don Jr. on a podcast show over the weekend, and he's literally talking about a conversation he had with his dad where they might actually not allow members of the media from large corporations to be in the White House for press conferences. They might individually pick individual journalists who will be covering the press conferences. This is a really dangerous scenario that we are in. I'll explain a little bit more. Here's what Don Jr. had to say about it.
But we had the conversation about opening up the press room to a lot of these independent journalists. Like, why should, if the New York Times has lied, they've been adverse to everything, they're functioning as the marketing arm of the Democrat Party, like, why not open it up to people who have larger viewerships, stronger followings? Like, it's not like the New York, I mean, how much money are they losing a year? The Washington Post, lost 70 to 45 to $70 million. Doesn't seem like they're a great success. So just because they've been there longer, it's like the way Congress functions. Like, you get a committee, not because you know anything about banking, but because you've been there longer. And it's like,
right.
Doesn't seem like a great way to do things. So we've had that conversation. Like, that's a great idea, Don. I was like, I think we should do this. And so that may be in the works. Let's see. That's going to blow up some heads. So, we'll see.
Absolutely and positively ridiculous. So first of all, when he uses the term independent journalist, what are we talking about here? We're talking about people that just call themselves journalists, that don't have any degrees in journalism, that don't interview both sides. They don't do any of that stuff. We're talking about a Joe Rogan, who's not a journalist, by the way. This is exactly what Don Jr. means. What they're going to do is they're going to handpick journalists, so-called journalists, that are on Donald Trump's side. They're not going to have the opposition in the room. Let me tell you something. I don't like Peter Doocy. I think he's a buffoon who listens to what Fox News tells him to do. I think most of his questions are very stupid, but I would never say that Fox News shouldn't be allowed to be in that room asking questions. What Donald Trump and his stupid son are planning to do, and I hope they don't do it, is handpick people in there that they like. Handpick people in there that call themselves journalists, like, some moron from OAN, some idiot from Newsmax, a Laura Loomer type. So if you want to know exactly what I think a White House press conference might be under the Donald Trump administration, I want you to have a listen to somebody by the name of Laura Loomer. Keep in mind that this is the same woman that Donald Trump invited to the 9/11 ceremonies. This is the same woman who said if Kamala Harris wins the election, the White House is going to smell like curry. This is the same woman who is an open Islamophobe. How do we know this? Because she self-admitted it on social media. This is a mentally ill woman who might be asking questions at a Donald Trump White House press conference. Ladies and gentlemen, Laura Loomer.
And called me crazy, but what are they doing? I want to know what people are actually going to do. My life is ruined. Does anybody understand how ruined my life is? I'm sick of it. I don't want to listen to people tell me that I'm a conspiracy theorist. They don't know what it's like to be me. My life is ruined.
Yeah, well, first of all, she looks like a clown. She's mentally ill. She's a sick human being. Even Donald Trump doesn't want anything to do with her anymore. But there are still rumblings, and there are people around Donald Trump that want her still to be around. Some of Donald Trump's advisors. We know that for sure. That's the kind of person that they would call an independent journalist. Let me be very clear. Laura Loomer can't even spell the word journalism. She doesn't interview both sides. These morons on social media that call themselves journalists. Oh, I'm going to put an expose on this person, on that person. They're not journalists. They just listen to one side and they throw out a bunch of garbage, in many instances are not true, and they call that journalism. That's not journalism. Now, listen, I was a reporter for 10 years. I'm not a journalist now, but back in the day I was. And you don't put any bias into your reporting. You reach out to both sides for comment, and you try to report on facts. And even on this show, I try to form my opinions based on facts. I'm not a journalist and I'm not a reporter. I'm an opinionated talk show host. Is Laura Loomer the type of person that you think should be in serious press conferences in the White House? Is that the kind of person you want? Think about that for a minute. Those are exactly the kinds of people that Don Jr. is talking about. Somebody like a Dinesh D'Souza, who, by the way, is a convicted felon. And even the judge that presided in his case said he needed mental health. Why? Well, he makes money off of lies. You think Dinesh D'Souza is a journalist, he's an idiot. Look at 2,000 Mules, based on nothing but lies, and he made money off this documentary, and these right-wing turds that think that the 2020 election was stolen will always source, 2,000 Mules. Yet there's not one piece of real evidence in that entire fictional documentary that shows anybody committing an actual crime. You want to know who actually did commit a crime? Do you want to know somebody who was actually convicted of a crime? Dinesh D'Souza. Now, after you're convicted of a crime, do you apologize? Do you say, geez, maybe I shouldn't have done that? Maybe I should have misappropriated campaign funds? Would you say, geez, I own what I did? No, not Dinesh D'Souza. D'Souza, just like Donald Trump, decided to attack the judge. Have a listen to this.
Well, the judge basically said that that I was not a very self-reflective man, and he was going to help me by ordering me to undergo mandatory psychiatric counseling. Now, this is extremely strange because, first of all, think of my offense. I didn't commit some perverted, whacked-out deal. I didn't put bodies in the refrigerator like Jeffrey Dahmer. I gave money to my own to a friend of 25 years who was running for the Senate. My motives were completely obvious. It was what one writer characterized as misguided loyalty to a friend. So do I need to go to a shrink for this? Well, the judge thought I did, and I characterize this as a re-education program. That guy was basically trying to get me to kowtow to Obama, kowtow to the left. I think if I had started making regular appearances on MSNBC, he would have pronounced me fully cured.
Complete nonsense. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Dinesh D'Souza, who you might see in the White House press briefing room. By the way, Dinesh D'Souza referred to Barack Obama multiple times as a Negro on social media. He's the one who helped push the birther issue. He is a blatant imbecile. The entire 2,000 Mules fictional documentary is based on nothing but lies. These are the kinds of people that Donald Trump will put in the White House press room so that Caroline Leavitt, who will be the new White House press secretary, will be spewing nothing but lies and BS. And nobody will be there to be able to question anybody. One thing I will say, there is something called freedom of press. And even though you might not like certain members of the media, they have a right to be in there and ask questions. Now, do I think a Laura Loomer, who doesn't work for anybody, who's never been hired by any reasonable outlet because everybody knows she's crazy, even the right-wing idiots know that she's a lunatic, even Donald Trump knows that, trying to push her away? People like Laura Loomer are going to be in the White House press briefing room. People like Dinesh D'Souza are going to be in the White House press briefing room. Now, I do want to play you an example of what I'm talking about. We need to have freedom of press. Do I like Peter Doocy, as I like to call him, Peter Douchey? He and his father, they're douches, right? All Peter Doocy does, and all he has been doing for the last several years, is ask stupid questions. He doesn't ask important questions about healthcare. He doesn't ask important questions about the economy and give and take and where we're going towards the future. He doesn't ask reasonable questions. He tries to ask gotcha questions because that's what Fox News enjoys, and that's what the idiots, so many of them that watch Fox News, enjoy, questions like this. This is Peter Douchey, as I like to call him, in the White House asking a question to Jean-Pierre. Have a listen to this.
We know that today, a week after the election, President Biden and Vice President Harris had a private lunch. How awkward was that?
I don't even understand. Why would it be awkward?
Because the president got squeezed out for her, and then she kept him at arm's length, and then she lost, and now she's back.
Why would you characterize it as awkward? They have regular lunches. They meet and talk regularly.
There's a reason why he asks questions like that. And by the way, he's an imbecile. And that's not journalism. Why was the lunch awkward? It's a stupid question. What are you trying to get? You're trying to get your moment on Fox News, and the Fox News executives want him to ask stupid questions like that. It's a dumb question. However, if the tide was turned, and for example, if somebody in the White House press briefing room when Donald Trump is president would ask a stupid question like, are you guys in a contractual marriage, you and Melania? Now, actually, I think that's more of a legitimate question than anything Peter Doocy ever asks. They would kick him out. Do you remember what they did with Jim Acosta, where they suspended and revoked his CNN credential for a little while there? That's what the Trump administration is going to do. That's what makes this so dangerous. Do you understand what I'm saying? It doesn't matter what side, at least it shouldn't matter, what side of the political aisle you are on. Members of the press should be able to ask questions, even if they're stupid. But there's a level of credibility. They don't want CBS reporters in there. They don't want MSNBC reporters in there. They're not going to want CNN reporters in there. A Caitlin Collins, who I think is a very good journalist. A Jim Acosta, who I think is a very good journalist. A Jake Tapper, who I think is a very good journalist. They're not going to want those kinds of people in there. Why? Because they don't want to be challenged. That's why. The types of people that will be in that White House press briefing room to hear Caroline Leavitt lie on a daily basis are going to be idiots on OAN, idiots on Newsmax, a bunch of Fox News morons, and people that will coddle to Donald Trump and members of his administration. Again, they don't want to be challenged. That is a dictatorship. That's exactly what we're talking about here. So I believe Don Jr., also known as Biff, I believe him that he had this conversation with his dad. They don't want to be challenged. That's why this is so dangerous. And the term fake news, who made up that one? Because you attack the media and you call CNN fake news, which is Donald Trump did for months, day after day. He still does. And then some lunatic decides to send pipe bombs to CNN. These are real human beings we're talking about here. I mean, I had a conversation, a private conversation the other day with Don Lemon, and he wouldn't mind me bringing this up. This is a man who got multiple death threats. He had a ton of security. He wasn't even able to go outside. They would pick him up with security, and they would drop him off in the garage at CNN. He would never see the light of day. Why? Because there were a lot of people that were threatening him and members of his family. Why? Because of Donald Trump's rhetoric. That's why. And when he talks about Trump, the enemy within, and he wants to arrest reporters and anchors at CBS because he doesn't like their reporting. If that was the case, I would say everybody at OAN, Newsmax, and Fox News can go to jail. That's not the way this country works. Do I think that some members of the media are very dangerous? Absolutely. Do I think Alex Jones should be in jail? Absolutely. Do I think people that have absolutely no integrity, the Laura Ingrams of the world, the Tucker Carlsons, the Sean Hannitys, the Mark Levins, these people have zero credibility. They're bigots. They lie on a daily basis. They lie about the elections. They lie about Donald Trump. They lie. But do I think all these people should go to jail? Would I call them the enemy within? Should we use our own military against them? No. Do I think they're bad people? Yes. You could have your opinions. But there is a certain level of decorum and professionalism that should always be shown when you're in the White House. Laura Loomer does not have that credibility. She has zero credibility. She's mentally ill. And most Republicans know that. It's interesting because I was having a conversation. I believe his name is Brian Glenn, if I'm not mistaken. It's Marjorie Taylor Greene's, I might be getting his name wrong, Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend. And I had a conversation with him at a Trump rally here. And we were talking about Laura Loomer because one of the few things I agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene on is Laura Loomer's despicable and her statements are horrible. And she shouldn't be anywhere near Donald Trump. She shouldn't be anywhere near any powerful position in the White House. So I agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I told him, I said, what do you think of Laura Loomer? And we had a very actually pleasant, respectful conversation. It could have gone south, but it didn't. He agreed with me that Donald Trump, horrible judgment, the people around him, like Jason Miller, who allowed Laura Loomer to be around Donald Trump on the 9/11 ceremonies when she is a conspiracy theorist who still believes that 9/11 was an inside job. Are these the kinds of people you want asking questions at the White House press conference if we have, God forbid, another pandemic, if we have a major crisis and tough questions need to be asked? Do you think Laura Loomer's the person that will ask and challenge Donald Trump? Do you think that Dinesh D'Souza is the felon? Do you think he's the kind of person that should be in there asking questions, or an Alex Jones? or anybody for that matter with no credibility that just kisses the ring of Donald Trump. That's what they want. That's the point I'm trying to make. Don Jr. and Donald Trump, they only want people there that are going to kiss the ring. They don't want to be challenged on anything, and that's dangerous. We should always hold anybody to account, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican as president of the United States. There should be people in that room that should be able to hold the president to account and ask challenging questions. And I'm going to tell you right now, they are not going to run the administration like that. They are not going to run the press corps like that. They're not going to run these press briefings like that. When they say something, believe it. Now, even though Peter Doocy literally asks stupid questions on a daily basis, they haven't kicked him out. They might mock him in answering one of his questions, but they continue to let him ask questions. They don't mock him. In fact, Joe Biden's even had personal phone conversations with him. You think Donald Trump would ever do that to Jim Acosta, give him a call and say, hey, man, I'm sorry. Let's try to work together. No, Donald Trump would never do that. Instead, he attacks women. He attacks women who happen to be black, minorities that are journalists. He has a habit of doing that. The enemy within. Well, let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. Any administration that doesn't believe in the freedom of the press, they're the enemy within. So I want to start with a little bit with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I've talked a lot about his background personally, professionally, the fact that the man has no medical experience, that he's a conspiracy theorist, and I think he's a cuckoo. He's crazy, and I've been very open about that and serious about it. I mean, even when he did this show months ago when he was still running for president of the United States, he basically admitted to committing a felony, offering to give his kids fake vaccination cards. This is the guy that's going to be in this powerful position, but it gets worse than that because this is a really bizarre interview that he did that was found. And I don't know, I find this a little strange, not that he was once addicted to heroin, but the way he talks about it. So I want you guys to have a listen to this. This is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., on a podcast, talking about how he was addicted to drugs and how it actually helped him in his life. Have a listen to this.
I went to a party for an elder brother of a friend of mine who had just been drafted to go to Vietnam. I was hitchhiking home from that party, and an older boy picked me up who I knew, and he offered me some LSD. And I had never taken any kind of drug before. I wouldn't have taken it, but I had a real deep interest, intense interest in paleontology. And I said to this guy, I said, if I take this, will I see dinosaurs? And he said, you might. I was walking home, and just before I got to my house, I saw some older boys in the woods. I went in there to see what they were doing, and I told them I was crashing on the acid. And they said, try some of this. And it was crystal meth. And I took a snort of it, and I felt great. And that incident was the template for my addiction over the next 14 years. Within a month, I was shooting heroin, and that was my kind of drug of choice.
Okay, so listen, he had a drug addiction issue, and I feel for anybody out there that has, right? It's a disease. But I do find it a little weird, and I would imagine some of you find it strange as well, that a man who had a 14-year addiction to heroin is so against life-saving vaccines. I find that very odd. He thinks that the vaccines are dangerous, yet he talks about a 14-year addiction to heroin. He thinks that vaccines cause autism, which is obviously medically debunked. It's not true. He claims that children are subjected to an immunization schedule that includes 72 vaccines. That's false. Basically, almost everything he says about vaccines is false. Yet this is the guy that's gloating, in a way he was, about heroin. And if you don't believe me, listen to this clip. Here's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. he's been talking about how he was doing poorly in school. And then when he started to take heroin, it helped him in school. Have a listen to this.
And I was at the bottom of my class. I started doing heroin. I went to the top of my class. Suddenly I could sit still and I could read.
Suddenly I can sit still and I could read. So he's actually talking about the benefits of taking heroin. Ladies and gentlemen, there are no benefits to taking heroin. It is an addictive drug. It kills so many people every single year. I know that because of members of my family, that at least one person that I know of that has passed away from taking heroin. So this is problematic. It's also very odd that it doesn't seem like he talks a lot about heroin as being a negative, at least not in this interview, but as being a positive. Heroin helped him in school. Have you ever heard him talk about vaccines in any positive way? Have you ever heard him say, geez, some vaccines I don't like, but, there's plenty of vaccines that save lives and help people. The COVID vaccines, they saved millions of lives. No, you'll never hear him say that. It's always negative stuff about the vaccines. Why is that? I'll tell you why. Because he's a kook, because he's crazy, because he's dangerous. And these are the kinds of people that Donald Trump invites not only into the White House for dinner, like a known bigoted racist, like a Kanye West, like an anti-Semite, like Nick Fuentes, but he actually gives jobs to people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a quid pro quo. It was basically Kamala Harris wouldn't talk to him, so he went over to the Trump side. Hey, in case Trump wins, I'll hedge my bets. If Trump wins, then I'll be able to work in his administration. This was all about power for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He absolutely knows who Donald Trump is. Audio came out the other day saying that Donald Trump supporters are Nazis. So does that mean that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a Nazi? Because I guess he's a Donald Trump supporter now. So this is all nonsense. It's crazy. This is just my personal opinion. I don't want somebody that has a drug addiction, that's been addicted to drugs for 14 years, to be in charge of my health. I'll tell you that right now. This guy's crazy. He's a lunatic. And everything he says about the vaccines are false. And then he starts speaking in positive terms about heroin and heroin overdoses and all the people, the hundreds of thousands of people that die of heroin overdoses every year. Yet he's saying it helped him in school. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is an embarrassment, and he's dangerous.